That's hard because I don't think there's been a super clear example of, I mean, I guess I would say for Parkinson's disease, we've just made more headway in understanding why the disease itself leads to certain symptoms that kind of hang together, like why there are certain cognitive symptoms and decision-making changes that we can now understand why they arise from the same or overlapping mechanisms that produce their motor impairments. And similarly, we can understand why certain treatments like dopamine therapies help some aspects of movement, and also they help some aspects of cognition, but they also hurt other things. Like some patients with Parkinson's disease can become pathological gamblers or show compulsive shopping and things like that. And we have a better understanding of why that might be. And so I guess I would say, but we haven't quite um, taken to the next step of figuring out exactly what would be the best therapy to replace the existing ones. Although we do have, so there are different kinds of dopamine drugs to replenish Parkinson's patients, and there are also different therapies like deep brain stimulation, which is something we also study a lot, where they implant, that's a surgical procedure where they implant an electrode deep into the brain. Um, and I think the neurologists and neurosurgeons now, in part because of some of the computational and the cognitive work that's been done, understanding mechanistically why some of these patients show impulsivity, they now are actually a lot more careful at screening out patients beforehand and saying they might not be the best candidate for this surgery or for this particular medication because of other risk factors that it seems like they might be more susceptible to these impulsivity effects. Whereas in the past, um, uh, I think neurosurgeons would feel like, well, if we've implanted an electrode and their motor symptoms got better, they would sort of wipe their hands and say, well, we fixed them. But from their quality of life standpoint, it's not always better. So now I think because we have more sort of theory that can explain why that same procedure can actually have uh, sometimes negative effects, that's caused people to sort of appreciate it better. And there are some attempts to make not only to screen out individual patients, but to apply what's called closed loop brain stimulation, which means instead of stimulating their brain all the time with a constant set of parameters, you can record from their brain all the time and use some sort of biomarker of whether the person is in a particular one kind of state or another, and use that to sort of in real time adjust their stimulation parameters to have better impact. I'll say one more thing, which is that I do have, like, from some of our models, um, without going into too much detail, but there's like one part of the basal ganglia that is being stimulated with those deep brain stimulators. And we've developed some models of how that part of the brain is important for regulating impulses, how it can sort of stop you from doing something that you have an initial urge to do. And from a computational sort of multiple levels of computation, you can sort of understand the sort of dynamics in that region and also its cognitive function. And so that has led one of my sort of collaborators who had a small pharmaceutical company to develop a new drug that targets receptors that are preferentially in that brain area. And he's had some promise in showing in like rodent models that it can have effects on the activity of the neurons in that area, and it also can have the effect on the behavior of the animals that sort of mimics um, what treating this problem would look like. So this part of the brain is present in animals and in humans, and we know that if you stimulate it in humans, it induces symptoms that are kind of similar to if you kind of lesion that area in an animal. And in his preliminary work, he showed giving that new drug that acts on this very specific mechanism in that region can actually prevent that cognitive side effect. So that's the kind of thing that I'm very excited about. But taking that finding in rodents and scaling it up to go through clinical trials so that humans would actually get that new treatment is something that would require another probably 10 years and many million dollars of research and pharmaceutical company that has to be excited enough about it and not worry about all the anytime you develop a new drug, there's possibility for toxicity, there's off-target effects, all sorts of stuff like that. So there's pragmatic reasons why even if you do come up with new computational theories about how the brain works and how to fix it, it's not going to be something that you can like translate into the clinic on that same year.
Yeah, I certainly think it's really cool how you mentioned development of the drug and also seeing how it's happened on rodent testing. I definitely hope inside the future we're able to see those companies really get involved inside this research and hopefully we can expedite this process, certainly. On the note of signal processing that you mentioned a little bit earlier, I was wondering how do you see the integration of machine learning and AI enhancing the study of cognitive neuroscience?
Yeah, there's so many ways in which that could happen. One of them could be, I guess, since we were talking about deep brain stimulation and closed loop, um, one could develop some analytical sort of control process model for how to change the stimulation so that it brings the brain into a better state and prevents the side effects. But you also could use AI to sort of discover, you might not have a good model of how changing the stimulation parameters of an electrode is going to change the neurons and the behavior. And AI is one way in which you can say, well, let's actually learn that relationship without necessarily having a theoretical model of it. You can sort of get a bunch of data and then try a lot of different parameters and train an AI model that learns the relationship between those stimulation parameters and brain states and between brain states and behavior. And that is that's one possible application of AI for improving neuroscience treatments. Um, but there's also AI approaches for just learning, just like we use large language models for understanding the structure of language. You could train, and some people are training equivalent kind of foundational models on uh, large data sets of brain activity or genetics and so forth, and using that to make predictions about whether um, that would be more in the large data set science kind of approach. But you can make predictions about whether someone would benefit from one treatment or the other, or whether they're likely to develop a certain disorder. That's another application of AI. Another application of AI that I'm particularly interested in is using trying to understand how AI agents have become smart. Like why did GPT and all the large language models suddenly become much better at sort of generalizing knowledge, and um, they exhibit properties of what's called compositionality. I'm not sure if this is familiar to you, but they can learn, when you have a conversation with GPT, they're essentially learning from what you're telling them, and then make new inferences about the conversation that you're having with them, about what you want to know. And that's something that old-fashioned neural networks couldn't really do. And trying to understand how they developed that, just from a AI standpoint, is really interesting. And there is a lot of good work on that. And it's something that we are working on as well, in part collaborating with people in computer science here as well. And doing that is also really interesting because we know that real neural networks, like biological brains, are really good at that kind of thing. At like, having conversations like we're having now. You didn't have to uh, know every sort of bit of background that I've had in order to understand a lot of what we're talking about now, because you can use your language and we can have back and forth conversations and make some inferences and so forth. And people are just amazing at that. And those AI models are just getting better, but they're nowhere near humans now. So what we want to know is, can we understand how the brain has evolved those strategies? What computational mechanisms in real neural networks allow humans to have that kind of ability? And can that be informed by our understanding of what's going on inside of these more advanced artificial neural networks? But then also vice versa, once we figure out, here are particular properties of the real brain that are not put in those artificial neural networks, can we actually then figure out what those properties might be doing, what is useful about them, and can we use those to augment the artificial neural networks? So all of that is really on, I guess, the interface between neuroscience and AI, and maybe doesn't directly answer your question about how does that help computational psychiatry. Um, but I do think that that kind of approach also just gives us better theories about how people can be adaptive and flexible. And then once you understand that better, you can also say, well, if you perturb those mechanisms in these models in a particular way, does that uh, reproduce certain symptoms that you might see in people with certain thought disorders or whatever kind of hallucinations, whatever you're trying to model.
Oh yeah, it's like that's like a plethora of like really, really like interesting points. First of all, like those language models that you mentioned that are trained kind of like on brain images and understanding like how different parts of the brain work and kind of if you think about that from like a chat GPT kind of perspective, you can kind of just like put in words and like expect it to auto-complete a sentence for you. It's like really cool to think about like the idea that maybe like you could just put in like an image of someone's brain and you could put in like different properties or different things that you're observing and like you have like a model that compute what's going on for you and auto-complete that. That's like really cool to think about. And you mentioned like that dichotomy between natural and artificial intelligence. And I think that's also like another really cool parallel, like kind of trying to understand like how the human versus artificial intelligence works and like how you can use one to kind of help understand the other. And it's like thinking about those models that can learn them, like as you mentioned, like GPT can learn from context and learn as like you progress in a conversation. As we strive towards like general artificial intelligence, I could see that become like a really, really relevant like venue of research. So yeah, it's really, really cool.
Yeah,
And
it's exciting. It's fun.
yeah, we had like a couple of like fun questions to kind of end off the interview. So, if you could have dinner with any scientist, living or dead, who would it be and why?
Oh boy. Uh, I don't know, maybe Galileo. Uh, I just made that up. Um, I think people who are sort of fundamentally overthrowing dominant paradigms and are bold enough to do so and have good rationale for doing so are exciting to talk to. So for the same reason, Einstein, um, and Newton and uh, yeah, maybe I'll stop at that.
Yeah, no, I know like Galileo's like research on heliocentric theory was quite cool. So it's a great answer.
I was wondering, what's your favorite thing to do in Providence?
In Providence, depends on you whether you count about Providence proper or surrounding areas. The other day I went with my kids to the beach in Rhode Island. That's not directly in Providence, but it's super nice. There's really nice hidden beaches here that are not the ones that are the popular ones, and you can um, climb up rocks and jump off of them into the ocean, which is pretty fun.
Oh yeah, that sounds cool.
I also like to do a lot of mountain biking and rock climbing, and all of that is maybe surprising to people who don't live or who aren't into those things and don't live in Rhode Island that it's actually pretty good here.
Oh yeah, wait, what beach is it? I've been to like Scarborough and like Narragansett with my parents, but like I need some new spot recommendations.
Yeah, those are really nice beaches, but those are more of the ones that are like the popular. Lots of people go there. The one
Mhm.
I'm thinking of now, I'm going to give it away, but it's called Tappins Beach, and it's in Little Compton, Rhode Island. There's a few others in that area, but the reason it's less popular is also because there's no parking lot right there. You have to kind of walk in along it's a private road, but you're allowed to walk down that private road to get onto the beach. So it's a bit more of a trek to get there. Once you're there, there's less people and it's a little bit more raw in terms of just rock structures and stuff.
Yeah, that's nice. Also, like, wait, is there like good climbing spots in Rhode Island? Or do you do like gyms or do you kind of like go outside
Yeah,
more?
I mean, honestly, I mostly because I go sometimes with people in my lab and other labs and mostly do it in the evenings and go to the gym. So that's just regular climbing gym. But there is actually a place called Lincoln Woods in Lincoln, Rhode Island, just north of Providence, which is also near where my gym is. But Lincoln Woods has some of the best bouldering in the country. There's these enormous boulders that were left by, I guess, some glacial period. And so people who like bouldering, it doesn't really get much better than that.
Sure, I'm gonna check that out the next time in Rhode Island. Thanks for the Rex.
Awesome.
Having taught at Brown, we were wondering, what do you like about its community over the past decade?
Yeah, Brown is awesome. The thing I like to say about Brown is that there are a few places where the science is really or the research facilities and so forth is really top notch. And people are doing really cutting edge work, but they're not always super supportive and collaborative with each other. And then there's some other universities where people are super nice and collaborative, but their research isn't as cutting edge. And Brown is one of, it's not the only place for sure, but it's one of the places that I think is in the sweet spot where we really have a great set of resources and amazing researchers, but largely people are on the same team and supporting each other. And also from the undergraduate students, tend to be really good and motivated and also good in very diverse ways. So, some people are really good at thinking about equations, and some people are really good about thinking about business or economics or big picture philosophy. But because of Brown's own philosophy about education, there's a lot of sort of intermingling between all those things. So people have sort of flexible creation of their curriculum, and so people kind of uh, mix and match between those adjacent fields, and that can be fun.
Yeah, for sure. Like the interdisciplinary like collaboration at Brown, I think is great. Like I know like with the open curriculum in the undergraduate program, that also seems like a really great place to kind of foster these interdisciplinary approaches. And yeah, it's a great school.
Thank you for listening to the Neural Network. That's Vasu, Armand, and Dr. Frank signing out.